I suppose every man's fate is written in the stars, but I never imagined mine would include being captured by pirates. Hit subscribe and the bell icon to discover amazing historical stories with us every week. My name is Gaius Julius Caesar, and though I am young, barely 25 years old, I already carry the weight of one of Rome's most ancient patrician families on my shoulders. We Julii claim descent from Venus herself through her son Aeneas, the legendary founder of our people. Such lineage should command respect, but in these troubled times, it has made me a target. The morning I was captured began like any other at sea. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly before our Byerme, its waters shimmering under the rising sun god Helios. I had been standing at the prow, feeling the salt spray on my face, contemplating my future. I was traveling to Rhodes to study oratory under the great Apollonius Molon, the finest teacher of rhetoric in the civilized world. My education had been interrupted by politics, by survival. Really, and now, with Sulla's grip on Rome temporarily loosened, I could pursue the skills every Roman nobleman needed to succeed in the Senate. My slave, Andronicus, stood faithfully beside me as always. He was a Greek, educated and loyal, more a companion than a servant. Over the years, we had developed an understanding that transcended the usual master-slave relationship. He knew my moods, my ambitions, my fears, though I would never admit to having any. "Master," Andronicus had said that morning, his voice carrying a note of concern, "the helmsman says we are entering dangerous waters. These islands are known haunts of the Cilician pirates. Pirates prey on fat merchants and weak-willed travelers. They would not dare touch a Roman patrician." How wrong I was! How foolishly confident! It happened within minutes. The lookout's cry of alarm was cut short by a thrown spear that sent him tumbling from his perch. Grappling hooks whistled through the air, biting into our ship's wooden rails with sickening thuds. Before our helmsman could even shout orders, the pirates were upon us. They came like a swarm of locusts, bearded, sun-darkened men with eyes that glinted with greed and violence. Their weapons were crude but effective: short swords, daggers, clubs. Our helmsman fell first, his skull crushed by a massive club wielded by a man who laughed as he struck. The helmsman's assistant tried to rally the half-awake passengers, but we were helpless. Among our number were elderly Greek merchants whose hands trembled with terror, a young woman clutching an infant to her breast, and myself, a young Roman who suddenly understood how quickly fortune could turn. The pirates herded us roughly toward the stern mast. I leaned on Andronicus, partly for support and partly to assess our captors. The leader was obvious: a barrel-chested man wearing absurdly wide red trousers that marked him as Oriental in origin. His beard was thick and black, shot through with gray, and his arms were covered in scars that told of countless battles. This was no ordinary brigand, this was a professional. As Helios climbed higher, illuminating our pathetic group of captives, I made a decision. I would not cower. I would not beg. I was a Caesar, descended from gods and kings, and I would act accordingly. When the pirate captain approached me, reaching out to grab my shoulder with his filthy hand, I responded with the full force of patrician contempt. "Get away, dog," I said, my voice cold and imperious. "I will punish you for your insolence." Andronicus leaped forward, trying to shield me, but I pushed him back impatiently. The slave meant well, but this was not a moment for protection, it was a moment for dominance. Yes, I repeat, I continued, staring directly into the pirate's shocked eyes. You will be crucified for this. The effect was immediate. The pirate captain, I would later learn his name was Minucius, jerked back as if I had struck him. Crucifixion was the death reserved for slaves and the worst criminals. A punishment so horrible that even hardened brigands feared it. But more than the threat itself, it was the certainty in my voice that shook him. I spoke not as a captive pleading for mercy, but as a magistrate pronouncing sentence. Minucius turned to his crew, and I caught the subtle wink he gave them. What happened next was so unexpected, so theatrical, that for a moment I thought I was dreaming. The pirates, these ruthless sea wolves who moments before had killed our helmsman without hesitation, suddenly collapsed to the deck like marionettes whose strings had been cut. They threw themselves down, wailing and crying, beating their chests in exaggerated displays of remorse. Even Minucius dropped to his knees, stretching his hands toward me in supplication. "Forgive me, patrician," he babbled, his voice thick with mock terror. "Anyone could make such a mistake. If I had known beforehand that you would be on this ship, would I have dared? It was a moonless night. Try to guess who is a patrician and who is a worthless plebeian, and your clothes are no different from everyone else's." "You dared to take my clothes," I interrupted, my voice sharp with outrage. Minucius sprang to his feet as if propelled by a catapult. "What scoundrels! What thieves! What wretches!" he roared, his eyes rolling dramatically. "Immediately return the patrician's clothing." The terrified pirates rushed to the bags of plunder. The air filled with flying garments, tunics, himation, felt hats. The other captives stood frozen by the mast, confusion written across their faces. The young mother stared at me as if I were indeed a messenger of the gods, sent to deliver them all. "Stop!" Minucius screamed when someone tossed a toga through the air. "Can't you see this is our patrician's property? How dare you defile it with your filthy paws?" He snatched the toga from a one-eyed pirate and lifted it carefully with 2 fingers, as if it were made of spider silk and morning dew. "Hey, you!" he addressed his crew. "Look at your rags. Compare them to this white toga. Now do you understand that you are not worthy of the soles of his sandals?" Suddenly he slapped his forehead with theatrical alarm. "Sandals! The patrician stands barefoot on the deck. He might soil his divine feet or get a splinter in them." One of the pirates, not waiting for the end of this tirade, found my expensive sandals in the pile and crawled toward me on his knees. I extended one foot, then the other, allowing the servile brigand to strap them on. It was absurd, surreal, but I maintained my composure. Whatever game they were playing, I would play it better. Minucius carefully handed me my toga, and I wrapped myself in it with practiced ease. Every movement calculated to project patrician dignity. The wool was still warm from the sun, and as it settled around my shoulders, I felt my confidence return fully. "A true patrician," Minucius exclaimed, "a descendant of Romulus himself, and such a man stands among us small, worthless creatures." He waved his hand imperiously. "Hey, you! Lower the ladder!" Within moments, a wooden ladder was lowered from the starboard side, and then the deck trembled with laughter. Beards shook, scarred cheeks and foreheads jiggled, eyes rolled back. The pirates howled with mirth, slapping each other on the back, tears of laughter streaming down their weathered faces. "That's Minucius for you," the one-eyed pirate screamed ecstatically. "What a show! No need to go to the theater." "What's so surprising?" said the one they called Minucius with a swagger. "Before I became an arch-pirate, I was an arch-mime. So that was it. I had been the unwitting participant in a theatrical performance, a cruel jest at the expense of Roman authority. But I gave no sign that I understood, no indication that I felt foolish or humiliated. Instead, I looked at Minucius with the same cold contempt I had shown from the beginning. He turned to me, his voice still carrying traces of mockery. "Now do you understand? Go on, then. We don't need patricians. We can do without them." The laughter died as quickly as it had erupted. Silence fell across the deck, broken only by Andronicus's soft sobbing. The young Roman walked with his head held high toward the ship's rail, and in that moment, everyone understood what it truly meant to be a patrician. I climbed over the rail, first one leg, then the other. My head disappeared from view. Any second now, there would be a splash, and the sea would claim its victim. But instead of a splash, everyone heard the dying words of a brave young man. How Sulla would rejoice to learn of Caesar's death, and almost simultaneously came the arch-pirate's shout, "Catch him! He must live!" Strong hands grabbed me, hauling me back onto the deck. I allowed them to pull me to safety, careful to show neither relief nor gratitude. When I stood once more on the wooden planks, I looked at Minucius with raised eyebrows, waiting for an explanation. The pirate's face had lost all trace of mockery. "Sit with me," he said quietly. "We need to talk." We sat on the deck, and for the first time, I truly studied my captor. Up close, I could see that Minucius was older than I had first thought, perhaps 50 years, and his face bore the marks of a hard life. But there was intelligence in his eyes, and something else, a weariness that comes from living outside the law for too long. "So this is what Caesar looks like," he began, his voice now devoid of theatrical flourish. "Sulla himself said that you have many Mariuses in you. What have you been doing since you fled Rome?" "I went to Asia," I replied evenly. "I heard that eloquence flourishes there. Today, I saw evidence of it." Minucius smiled ruefully. "Let's forget about that joke. My profession is serious. A man must laugh sometimes. I served under the eagles of Marius, and when Sulla came with his army to Asia, I went into mimes. But Sulla wouldn't leave me in peace. He started hunting down Marians. I had to seek refuge at sea. Besides," he added, after a pause, "the sea has brought me fame. Have you ever heard of a Roman soldier named Minutius, or a mime by that name? No, but everyone knows the pirate Minutius. 10 Greek cities pay me tribute just so I won't enter their harbors, and so many nobles have honored me with their attention. Even King Mithridates himself." He broke off, perhaps realizing he had said too much. "I haven't heard the main thing," I said dryly. "How much do I owe you for our acquaintance?" Its face grew somber. "I won't take anything from a Caesar. You fled from Sulla, after all." I shrugged impatiently. "I don't want to be an exception. I have no money with me now. Name your sum." "I see you're stubborn," Minucius said. "If you want to be like everyone else, You'll owe me 100,000 sesterces. Pay it when you make something of yourself. Why delay? I replied sharply. My slave Andronicus will get you 100,000 in 40 days, and I will remain on your ship as a hostage until then. We send hostages to the island, Minucius objected mildly. We have a cave there. We can't spend all 40 days waiting for ransom. But I want to stay on the ship, I said with deliberate petulance. It's damp in the cave. I have weak health, and my doctors advise me to be in fresh air. Besides, I give you my word as a patrician, I won't interfere with you. Well, all right, Minucius muttered, if it's about health and fresh air. He left to give orders. Within an hour, the Biorme separated from the Myoparan. On its deck stood a single passenger, my slave Andronicus. He leaned over the rail, looking at me as if seeing me for the last time, and so began the first of the 40 days of my captivity on the pirate ship. Looking back now, I can see that those 40 days shaped me more than any tutor ever could. On that pirate vessel, far from Rome and the civilized world, I learned lessons about power, about fear, about the thin line between confidence and madness. But most importantly, I learned about revenge, how to plan it, how to execute it, and how to ensure that no insult ever goes unanswered. The sun was setting as Andronicus's ship disappeared over the horizon, and I stood at the rail, watching the sky turn the color of blood. Minucius approached, standing beside me in silence for a long moment. "You're an unusual young man, Caesar," he finally said. "Most hostages spend their time weeping and begging. But you, I can't decide if you're the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish." I turned to face him, and in the dying light, I allowed myself a small smile. Perhaps I am both, or perhaps I simply understand something that you and your men do not. "And what is that?" "That fortune favors the bold," I replied, "and that every man, no matter how low he has fallen, still remembers what it means to face someone who refuses to bow." Minucius studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. 40 days, he said. "We'll see if you're still so confident when they end." "Oh, I will be," I assured him. "In fact, I suspect that by the end of our time together, you'll wish you had thrown me overboard after all." He laughed, but I noticed it didn't quite reach his eyes. Even then, I think Minucius understood that he had made a terrible mistake not in capturing me, but in letting me live. As darkness fell over the sea and the stars emerged one by one, I retreated to the small tent they had erected for me on the stern. Alone at last, I allowed myself to acknowledge the truth. I was terrified. My heart was pounding. My hands were trembling, and every fiber of my being screamed at me to show fear, to beg for mercy, to act like the captive I truly was. But I had learned something important today, something that would serve me for the rest of my life. It doesn't matter what you feel inside. What matters is what you show the world. And what I would show these pirates, day after day for 40 days, was that Caesar cannot be intimidated, cannot be broken, and most importantly, cannot be made to forget an insult. Before I slept that first night, I made a vow to myself and to Venus, my divine ancestress. I would survive these 40 days. I would secure my freedom. And then I would teach these men what it truly meant to mock a Caesar. The game had begun, and I intended to win. The second day dawned with the realization sinking into the marrow of my bones. I was truly a captive now, and the power I wielded in Rome was nothing more than a memory amid the endless sweep of the sea. The pirates, Minucius at their head, had established a routine, and I was expected to partake in it. But I resolved that even captivity could become a stage for strategy, for lessons, and for asserting my identity. My quarters were austere, a makeshift tent under the stern, the fabric bleached by salt, the boards below me sticky with brine. I would wake from uneasy sleep to the barked orders of pirates mending sails, cursing the gods, divvying up their spoils, and playing dice with the manic glee of men living on borrowed time. I kept myself apart, using the discipline drilled into me by my family's tradition. Early each morning, I forced myself to exercise. Stretches, running on the spot, shadowboxing, as I'd seen the legionaries do. If nothing else, I'd keep my body strong and my mind sharp. These pirates would not see me languishing, soft or defeated. At meals, Minucius sometimes joined me, chewing tough bread and smoked fish he offered without ceremony. "You do not eat much for a Roman," he observed on the third morning. "I am less hungry for your food than for my freedom," I replied, studying him for reaction. Often, Minucius would try to draw me into tales of his past exploits, reveling in his own legend as the master pirate feared in all 10 cities of Asia. I let him talk, but always reminded him subtly, indirectly, who he was dealing with. "You have encountered noblemen before, Minucius. None are quite like Caesar. Some days, the weather was perfect. Golden sunlight painted the wine-dark sea, and the islands in the distance shimmered like jewels. Other days, storms would threaten. The pirates were hardened to such dangers, but I sensed dread lurking in their ranks. Tales of Roman patrols, rumors of other pirate bands, the ever-present possibility that Roman vengeance would catch up with them. I became the center of their superstitions. The men alternately feared and mocked me, uncertain whether I was a talisman or a curse. Meanwhile, I waited. Andronicus had left on the second ship, bound for the city where my supporters would raise the ransom money. Each passing day felt longer. The isolation, the monotony, the bitter games I played to retain their respect. I wrote poetry on wax tablets, sometimes composing dramatic speeches to pass the time or to test my rhetorical abilities. Often I would declaim these verses to the pirates, intentionally using complex Latin. Some pretended to understand, others simply nodded, eyes glazed. "Dullards," I would chide. "Barbarians, you are ignorant of the beauty of Roman language. When fortune turns, you will realize that life offers more than plunder." Minucius laughed at this. "Perhaps, Caesar, but who will teach us? The Senate? The philosophers of Athens?" The days blended together, marked by sunrises and sunsets. By my increasing resolve, I documented events large and small, determined to turn suffering into wisdom. I observed Minucius's leadership style, a mixture of raw force and sly humor, and wondered how he had survived so many years at sea. I remembered, too, the lessons my mother Aurelia had drilled into me since childhood. Patience, the power of silence, and the need to appear undefeatable no matter what shadows crossed my path. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the unfamiliar constellations overhead. I felt the pull of Rome, the weight of my responsibilities, the burning shame of being powerless. I resolved, with every breath, that this captivity would not break me. Instead, I would bend it to my will. I grew bolder, challenging Minucius to games, pressing him about his motivations and the lives of pirates. Through banter and debate, I collected stories, some proud, some tragic. The pirates became human. I learned of their families left behind in Cilicia, their dreams and their bitterness toward the Senate and Rome's endless wars. Minucius, I realized, was tired. He spoke of retirement, of perhaps returning to land, surviving there as a legend. All the world will whisper of this prize. I did not answer, knowing that notoriety can cut both ways. By the end of the second week, I sensed a shift. The crew no longer mocked me openly. They began to treat me less like a captive and more like an honored guest, one whose favor or wrath mattered. In their eyes, I became a player in their strange game of survival, and sometimes, when the wind howled or distant thunder rolled, I wondered whether I was truly prisoner or simply at the mercy of destiny. One midnight, Minucius confided that he had once dreamed of being a senator. The law is cruel to those born outside privilege. I listened, reminded of my own precarious fate, the years spent dodging Sulla's proscriptions, the loss of my inheritance, the uncertain promise of Rome's forgiveness. Even the greatest bloodlines can be swept away by political storms. I dreamt of justice, of crucifixion for those who dared mock me, and of a future in which Caesar's name would command fear, not laughter. The second part of my captivity closed with a promise to myself and to Rome. I would endure, I would study, and I would never allow myself to be seen as weak. My survival would be its own kind of triumph, a rehearsal for the greater challenges yet to come. I shivered in the salty wind, resolved. Fortune was fickle, but my will was absolute. Nearly 3 weeks into my captivity, the rhythms of pirate life settled into me like a foreign heartbeat. I had never imagined the sea could transform men so completely, stripping away the trappings of civilization and exposing their raw ambition and vulnerabilities. Each day brought new lessons about the pirates, about myself, and about the shifting boundaries of power. Minucius proved to be a more nuanced adversary than I first suspected. He reveled in his role as a seafaring lord, yet often showed flashes of regret or longing for a life less marked by violence. Around his men, he was all bravado and clever command, but behind closed tent flaps, he confessed small truths: a lost brother in an Athenian brawl, a child in Cilicia he had not seen since her infancy, dreams of a vineyard that would never be planted. I listened, half out of obligation and half out of genuine curiosity. There was nobility in his grief, even as destiny had led him to become my captor. For my own part, I wrote, the wax tablets I had salvaged from my luggage became repositories for speeches, poems, and, as time dragged, secret letters I never intended to send. I described the pirates and their superstitions, the rituals of dividing loot, the strange camaraderie among people united by lawlessness. I studied every face, memorizing strength and fear, Mapping relationships, the older pirates were suspicious, but the youngest ones began to respect my intellect. Some even asked for lessons in Latin, which I gave grudgingly. I would not squander the opportunity to extend Roman influence, even among outcasts. Sometimes, after meals, Minucius challenged me to debate. We argued over justice, fate, the virtues of Roman law versus the necessity of pirate liberty. These arguments could last hours, watched by the whole crew. Minucius took pride in his wit, but I made certain my words were sharper. "There is justice," I told him, "for all who rob or betray. Rome will find you in the end, whether on land or sea." Some nights, storms lashed our ship, forcing everyone into cramped, damp quarters. I witnessed pirate discipline efficient, ruthless, born of experience. When a mast split under lightning, Minucius coordinated repairs with military precision. It occurred to me that in a different life, he might have led legionaries instead of brigands. His men respected him fiercely, and sometimes, I think, feared him even more. During these tempests, the pirates were anxious. They whispered of omens, visions of Roman warships on the horizon, signals sent by rival bands, rumors that the ransom would never arrive. My status as hostage combined with my unflinching demeanor seemed to unsettle them. I began to exploit their anxiety, subtly hinting that Roman vengeance was always just a day's sail away. I developed relationships, not friendship, but useful bonds with key men in the crew. I shared news of Rome, taught them Roman songs, even advised on their dice games. My aim was twofold: to stay informed and to plant seeds of doubt about their future. Several began to question Minucius more aggressively, pressing him to deliver me back before my value waned. And the threat of Roman retribution grew. The growing tension on board led to heated confrontations. Minucius lost his Zen-like composure, shouting at his men and threatening punishment. I watched carefully, knowing that the cohesion of pirates could fracture. Each crisis was a rehearsal for the leadership battles I would face in Rome. One morning, a lookout spotted a Roman trireme in the distance, flying the imperial eagle. The pirates panicked, scattering across the deck, arming themselves as if war were imminent. But the trireme sailed on, oblivious to our presence. Still, the message was clear. The power of Rome extended even to these cursed waters. I felt a surge of hope and resolve. A few days later, Andronicus returned aboard the ransom ship, bearing sacks heavy with silver coins, 100,000 sesterces, the sum Minucius had demanded. The reunion was emotional. Andronicus, pale and shaken, clasped my hands in trembling gratitude. "Master," he whispered, "Rome has paid. Your freedom is at hand." I allowed myself only a brief moment of relief, but I was determined my ordeal would not end with mere escape. I would ensure that Caesar's dignity was restored and that the pirates would pay for their insolence. The third part of my captivity closed on this vow. Vengeance, meticulously planned, would follow my release. I stared at the silver, the sea, and the red dawn. My story was only beginning. What do you think about this historical event? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. My ransom had been paid. Minucius, ever the theatrical, feigned generosity, declaring that 5,000 sesterces of the sum were nothing, and that I should keep it for necessary expenses. His men watched this transaction with wary fascination, as if wealth itself might transform me or absolve their crimes. There was, however, no cheer in my heart. I did not feel gratitude or kinship. I felt a chilling satisfaction that the first act of my trial was complete, and that I would soon exact Roman justice for my humiliation. The ship set course for a rocky cove between two islands, where we would rendezvous with the Roman contact overseeing my release. The pirates had grown restless. Their jokes were more guarded, their songs less hearty. A few offered awkward apologies for their treatment. Sensing the winds of fortune might soon bring the imperial eagles down upon them, Minucius blustered on deck, keeping up the show of bravado, but he cast frequent furtive glances to the horizon. He understood, better than most, that Roman vengeance was inevitable. I made preparations. Before I departed, I summoned several pirates privately and reminded them that Rome's memory was long, that insults to the Julii would be paid for in blood or gold. The day of release came with a metallic sky and the salty sting of incoming rain. As I stepped onto the arranged vessel, Andronicus at my side, I did not look back at the pirates. Minucius muttered a farewell, his voice thick with something like respect or regret. "You will go far," he said. I acknowledged the words but did not smile. I had learned, in those 40 days, the value of both dignity and patience. Hours later, as our ship sailed away, 2 long Roman Liburnians appeared out of the morning mist. They moved with purpose, a purpose I knew well. Imperial Marines stormed the pirates' vessel, overwhelming them with disciplined ranks. There was little resistance. The pirates were outnumbered, their spirit drained by weeks of uncertainty. I watched from afar, standing motionless at the stern. For the first time, the world seemed to tilt in my favor. I no longer felt powerless or alone. Caesar's reputation was restored, and soon Roman justice would be fulfilled. Minucius and his men were chained and led aboard the warships. Their fate was sealed. Later, a centurion approached me, eager to impress. "The proconsul will rejoice when I deliver these villains," he said, gesturing toward the pirates. I replied coldly, "Let him be satisfied with their capture. Crucifixion is the Roman way for traitors and criminals." I handed the centurion the 5,000 sesterces Minutius had refused, my eyes never leaving the bound pirates. Rome's wheels turned slowly but surely. Justice comes for all. When I passed Minucius, I left him with one final message. No one is permitted to joke with Caesar without consequence. He nodded, understanding at last that our encounter was not a game, but destiny fulfilled with iron and fire. That night, as the pirates were taken from sight and the stars settled over the silent waves, I descended into the ship's lower chamber, refusing to witness the final act. Andronicus found me there, trembling with relief and exhaustion. I was not comforted. I had done what was necessary, not what was merciful. Yet, as my ship moved toward Rome, I felt the world shift. I was changed not only by my suffering and endurance, but by the chilling certainty that the future belonged to those who claimed it. The 4th act of my ordeal ended with vengeance, but also with a sober realization: power demands sacrifice, and pride must be paid for in both gold and blood. Returning to Roman territory after my ordeal, I was greeted not with the fanfare one might expect, but with suspicion, whispers, and the cool courtesy reserved for men who have survived disgrace. I stepped onto the docks, Andronicus close behind, breathing in the heavy, tar-scented air. My heart beat fiercely, half with relief, half with a hunger for vindication. My name had survived, but my reputation was now a question. In the days that followed, the story of my capture spread along the bustling harbors and narrow alleyways of Rome like fire through dry grass. Some scoffed, saying I had been foolish, careless, unworthy of my noble lineage. Others, especially those who understood the threat posed by Sulla and the instability of the Republic, saw the ordeal as a test of character, one in which boldness, cunning, and unyielding pride had been my armor. Rome, ever a city of factions, divided opinions on Caesar as it did on everything else. My mother, Aurelia, received me with stoic affection, her sharp eyes betraying both worry and hope. "You have survived," she said, touching my shoulder. "But Rome will want more than survival. It will demand triumph." Words that shaped my resolve. From the earliest days of my childhood, Aurelia had taught me that legacy mattered more than comfort, that every trial was an audition for glory or ruin. I resolved that my pirate ordeal would not be my epitaph, but my prologue. I attended gatherings at the homes of friends and clients, recounting my experience with pirates, careful to highlight moments of bravery and wit, while omitting passages of fear and self-doubt. I described my negotiations, the games I played with minutiae, my unfailing composure amid chaos. Each retelling polished my legend, and soon influential senators appeared eager to be associated with a young man who had stared death in the face and responded with scorn. Still, vindication did not come easily. My political enemies, emboldened by Sulla's lingering influence, mocked my capture. "Caesar finds poetry among pirates," they sneered. Or, "a nobleman more fit for ransom than for Rome's Senate." Each barb stabbed at my pride, but each also stoked the fires of ambition. I took to law courts, defending wronged citizens, prosecuting corrupt officials, building my reputation as an orator and advocate of justice. My voice, refined by piracy and adversity, carried farther than before. Andronicus, too, found his life altered by our ordeal. Among the slaves and freedmen who served Rome's nobility, his account of loyalty and resourcefulness became near mythic. I ensured his service was rewarded, giving him responsibilities usually reserved for trusted associates. He became my ear in the streets, my eyes in the marketplace, a vital piece in the subtle chess of survival. It was now that I realized the full lesson of my captivity. Rome was a city that rewarded boldness but devoured the timid. The pirates had shown me the brutality of lawlessness. But my restoration to Roman society proved that rules and traditions offered their own hazards. To thrive and to preserve the name of Caesar, I would have to become more than clever or defiant. I would need to master the currents of politics, the tides of history, the tempests of human ambition. The fifth part of my story closed with a simple vow, spoken into the flickering lantern light of my family's home. I would never again allow myself to be a captive, either by pirates or by circumstance. Rome, with all its dangers, would become my sea, and I would become its master. The sixth chapter of my life post-captivity began in the shadow of Sulla's legacy and the uncertain peace of Rome, though the city buzzed with elections, speeches, and plots. I sensed an undercurrent of fear and rivalry, remnants of the chaos that Sulla had instructed during his dictatorship. For a man of my background, survival was no longer enough. Ascension was now my goal. I threw myself into studies with reinvigorated zeal, traveling once to Rhodes for the oratory lessons denied to me by pirates. My mind sharpened under the tutelage of masters, my rhetoric polished into a blade that could cut down senators and rabble alike. The lessons learned on Minucius's ship became foundation stones for every argument I made. Never show weakness. Never let rivals see your doubts. Let words command as swords would. My popularity grew partly for my resilience, partly for the rumors that I intended to challenge old power structures. Friends and enemies gathered at my threshold, some hoping to bask in my charisma, others seeking to undermine it. The old guard viewed me with suspicion and whispered reminders that the Julii, no matter how ancient, had never held uncontested power. Every public appearance, every lawsuit, every speech became arenas for contest. I became gladiator and tactician at once. In personal life, I found solace and strategy. My marriage to Cornelia was both a bond and a shield, aligning me with influential families but also making me a target for further intrigue. My daughter Julia was born, the dawn of a new hope but also a challenge. How to protect my family while carving my own name in the marble of Rome? I accepted minor magistracies, learning the city's bureaucracy and patronage. Small triumphs, a well-argued case, a successfully organized festival. The respectful nod from a senior senator were bricks in my rising reputation. But no victory felt secure. Every friend could become a rival, every favor a debt, every applause a warning. Andronicus, more than ever, became indispensable, tracking rumors and allies across the city. With his help, I established networks among freedmen and clients, building loyalty not through gold, but through shared purpose and protection. I rewarded trust and remembered betrayal, weaving a cautious web of influence. More than once, I pondered the fate of Minucius and his men. News trickled in that some had been crucified. A few had managed to bribe their captors. Others had simply vanished into the back alleys of Rome. Such was the justice of the Republic, swift, unpredictable, driven by power and vengeance. I could not mourn them, but neither could I forget what their world had taught me. The sixth act of my journey closed in the quiet of my study, candles flickering over scrolls of law and maps of the known world. I was no longer the impulsive youth mocked by pirates. I was Caesar, tested, ambitious, and increasingly unafraid. Rome, with all its shadows, was the arena I intended to master. My heart burned with the conviction that destiny was not inherited, it was seized. My ascent in public life was like a new voyage, full of hidden currents and sudden storms. Rome was a city brimming with ambitions, both secret and overt, and I walked its marbled streets, aware that every handshake and every smile was weighted with potential alliances and betrayals. In the Senate, I learned strategy from observation as much as participation. Rival families eyed me as both upstart and legitimate threat, and each debate became a battleground for reputation long before swords or laws were drawn. Still, my ordeal with the pirates remained common knowledge, shaping, sometimes undermining my image. While enemies mocked my time as hostage, friends remarked on my resolve and daring. More than once, I turned my story into a parable for young supporters. No man is free from danger, but every danger is a test of mettle. I hosted dinners and festivals, gathering Rome's up-and-coming minds. I sought alliances not just among the aristocracy, but also among the equestrians, the rising class of merchants and professionals. I listened to their grievances about taxes, corrupt governors, and pirates that still haunted the eastern seas. Their complaints reminded me that Rome's reach, while vast, was never total. In private, Andronicus counseled caution. "Your name draws both hope and envy," he warned. I could not dismiss his words. I had seen how the smallest rumor could swell into crisis, how the memory of Sulla's violence lurked just below the surface. Even the streets had ears, slaves, freedmen, merchants, all involved in the complex web of Roman politics. I began to cultivate my public persona as much as my policies. I dressed with careful elegance, appeared at popular games, and volunteered for causes that served both the people and Rome's future. Slowly, I earned a reputation for generosity and fairness, as well as wit. I presided over lawsuits and arbitrations, winning both popularity and respect. One spring, I was assigned a minor diplomatic post and traveled to distant provinces. There, I saw firsthand the impact of piracy and the suffering it caused to Eastern traders. I pressed governors to increase patrols and spoke to local councils about Rome's promise of order. These lessons from the field strengthened my sense of justice and my reputation as a voice for the oppressed. Back in Rome, I prepared for the move toward higher offices. Every speech was rehearsed, every vote counted. My supporters grew in number and influence, unified by my message. Rome must reward boldness, but never tolerate cruelty, not among foreigners, nor within its own ranks. By the seventh act, I had become a figure that could not be easily dismissed, a leader tested by ordeal, hardened by adversaries, and poised to shape the destiny of a restless republic. If you enjoyed learning about this piece of history, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more fascinating stories, and let me know in the comments which historical period you'd like to explore next. The final act of my tale, my transformation from captive to contender, unfolded as I assumed my first significant magistracy. The city was restless. The wounds of civil war still scarred Rome's streets and hearts. Ambition whispered in every corridor, and destiny felt nearer with each passing day. I marshaled my years of hardship, my brush with pirates, the lessons from Rhodes, the bitter contests with Sulla's legacy, and focused them into service. I worked tirelessly, not just for my own glory, but for the restoration of Rome's dignity and justice. As quaestor in Hispania, I confronted corruption, organized relief for provinces ravaged by war and piracy, and argued for reforms that would reduce exploitation by the powerful. My reputation, built from survival and boldness, opened doors that had once seemed barred. The halls of power welcomed me, sometimes reluctantly, but always with mounting respect. My speeches were meticulous, honed from trial and peril. Once the butt of jokes, I now served as an example for ambitious Romans, proof that adversity could sharpen talent and resolve. The memory of Minucius and his men lingered, a cold warning never to mock the tides of fate or the power of vengeance. Their world was a mirror of Rome itself, lawless, cunning, and yet desperate for order. I made it my mission never to forget those lessons. My policies, though at times unpopular, always bore the imprint of those days at sea. Assertive in crisis, measured in victory, merciful only when justice permitted. Personal triumphs and setbacks followed. Old allies became adversaries. New opportunities arose with every risk. Through all, I was guided by a conviction born of suffering, that greatness in Rome was a matter not of heritage or mere ambition, but of courage and adaptability. I came to view every obstacle as a stepping stone, a trial by which my resolve was strengthened, my vision focused. As I prepared to move towards the consulship and the greater destinies awaiting me, the city buzzed with anticipation. I was not yet the Caesar who would change Rome forever, but I was no longer the youth mocked for his captivity. I was tested, tried, and unbroken. With gladiatorial resolve and unabashed hope, I looked upon the marble city and the restless waves beyond. My story was far from over. It was simply the beginning of the journey by which Rome and the world would remember Caesar's name.